used to struggle a lot with being too heavy. It's a bit tough to admit, but it's part of my story. To tackle this issue, I came up with a plan. I started walking 1 to 2 miles every day, which became my regular exercise routine. So each morning at 6 a.m. before heading to work, I would walk 1 to 2 miles. I'd leave my house on an empty stomach, not eating anything, and drive about 10 minutes to the nearby park. There was a forest around it and a play park in the middle. Usually I wouldn't see many people, especially in the cold winter. It would just be getting light around 6 or 7 a.m. Anyway, I have a very strong memory from one day, and this memory is special because usually when I walk, I only see a few people with dogs. Very rarely, since it's so early at 6 a.m., and the ones I see are either biking to work or seem out of place. I tried to avoid those people, even though I knew some of them might be not so nice. I was around 38 years old. I'm a female and I didn't wear anything attention-grabbing, just leggings and a jacket, as my main focus was on reaching my weight loss goals. So one morning, I drive to the park, put on my walking stuff, and right away, I start walking the 2-mile loop. As I go around to the left side of the loop, I'm about halfway when I see a man up ahead. He's shouting into the trees. I start thinking, this guy must be a bit crazy, or maybe his dog went into the forest and found something. Who knows? So now, this guy was walking really slow. It only took me about 2 minutes to catch up to him. Remember, when I turned the corner to go left halfway through my walk, he was a good 200 meters ahead of me. I was walking pretty fast, so it took me about 2 minutes to reach him. As soon as he saw me behind him, he stopped. He began staring into the trees and stopped yelling. Then he started walking a lot faster, like he didn't want me to pass him. I found this kind of strange. I had no idea what he wanted or why he was yelling earlier. He was wearing a tracksuit, so I thought maybe he was out for a run or was maybe out exercising like me. He looked like he was in his 50s. He was bald on the top of his head with long hair on the sides and back and had glasses on. I know, kind of like the typical look of someone following you, but I didn't think much about it. As I get closer to him, he realizes I'm right behind him and he decides to stop suddenly. He turns around and stares at me as I walk past him. I say a simple good morning, but he doesn't reply. He just keeps staring at me with really intense eyes, and at this point, I started thinking if I should have turned around earlier and just walked back the way I came. It still would have been 2 miles, so I would have reached my goal. As I walk past him, he's still just looking at me without saying anything. He's not yelling or walking anymore. I keep walking, and I have maybe about a quarter of a mile left until I get back to the car. As I pass him, I don't hear him walking anymore. I can just sort of tell he stopped because we were on one of those gravel paths. You can easily hear people coming towards you on the gravel, even if they're walking slowly, not to mention running. So there was quietness behind me, and I could sense this guy just staring at me. I felt really uncomfortable and tried my best to walk faster. When I looked back, I saw he was still standing there. I don't know if I triggered something in him, but after that, he started walking after me. He walked much faster after me than he did when I was coming up behind him. That really scared me, so I sped up again. Before I knew it, I could hear this guy walking at the same pace and rhythm as me. I could tell because the sound of his steps matched mine on the gravel path. I didn't want to look back by now, and I was pretty sure this guy was really trying to come after me. It felt like he might grab me and drag me into the side of the forest to do something bad, or he might hurt me because he seemed like a real creep. I didn't know what to do. He was walking fast, but so was I. I couldn't walk faster than him, and I definitely couldn't run away, so I just kept walking quickly. I prayed I'd run into someone else up ahead who could help me. I didn't have any pepper spray, a taser, or even a whistle, as I never thought I'd need them before. In all the years I've been out on my own, nothing bad ever happened. But now I was really wondering, is this the time when something bad is about to happen, like being hurt? or even killed. I had no clue. My phone was in the car, so I couldn't call 911 or try to reach my husband for help. After about 30 seconds of hearing him walk, I realized that this guy isn't catching up to me. It might sound weird as I tell you this, but this guy was like imitating me or something. He was trying really hard to walk like me and at the same speed. He even swung his arms the same way as me. Before I knew it, he was walking next to me, copying everything I did. I realized he wasn't joking. He had serious challenges. Whether it was mental, I couldn't say for sure. There were no caregivers around, and he seemed totally out of control. So, I figured he probably wasn't going to hurt me badly. Or so I thought, but he was very unpredictable. He followed me all the way to my car and didn't say a word. And every time he spoke, it was just mumbling. He would say some random words, or just whistle. I guess that was just his way of talking, or maybe he was shouting at the trees, I don't know. I finally got back in my car, took a drink, then drove off right away. I called my husband and told him about what happened. He told me to drive straight home and not stop anywhere. This strange guy was just walking back into the forest as I drove away and looked in my mirrors. This was the weirdest experience I've ever had, and from now on I change my morning walk to the evening. I either go with a friend or my husband on his bike. But what was that guy even doing in the forest? And what was up with him? Did he not have someone taking care of him? Like a family or a caregiver? Maybe I should have called the local ward or psych ward, but I didn't think about that then. I live in Ottawa, Canada, and this incident happened around 2 years ago when I was in 8th grade. This new girl, let's call her Claire, came to my school, and even though she wasn't in my classes, she was friends with my buddy, Cole. For about a week, everything was normal. Then, during lunch, Claire and her friends started looking at me. I didn't really pay attention, but later that evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "Hey." Being confused, I asked who it was, and they replied saying it was the girl from lunch who was looking at me, and that's how we started texting and hanging out at school. I started to really like her. When I thought it was the right time, I asked her to be my girlfriend. She said yes, without any hesitation. Then she told all her friends, and the news even reached my cousin Danny, who was a year younger and goes to Claire's old school. The next day, Danny texted me asking, "Why Jacob? You barely know her." "What do you mean?" I replied. "She has a bad history with her ex," Danny said. As a teenage guy, I was like, well, this is my chance, but Danny texted again saying, "She has a bad history with her ex-boyfriend. She ended up stabbing him with a knife in the gut, sending him to the hospital." "Oh shit," I said. My heart sank because this was my first real relationship, and I didn't want something bad to happen to me. But at the same time, I was really curious to know if the rumors about her were true. So that night, I texted her and asked if she wanted to play 21 questions. She said yes, so we started with simple things like, "What's your favorite color?" and such. Then, I asked a more serious questions, like, "Do you smoke? And have you ever been with many people?" She answered yes to all of them. On the last question, before I had to go to bed, I asked, "What happened with your last boyfriend?" She responded suspiciously, asking, "What do you mean? Have you already heard? Who told you?" I didn't want to rat out my cousin, so I just said I was curious. She then said, "Sorry, I gotta go. Bye." The next day, she asked me to come over to her place. She mentioned she was home alone, but I was scared because of what happened with her last boyfriend. But still, I was kind of excited and was hoping something might happen. I said yes, but right after I sent the message, my dad called me from the basement and said, "Jacob, come up for some hockey." We were running late for the first practice of the year. I felt both upset and relieved. I had a real reason not to go, but I was upset because I couldn't. After hockey, when I came home, I got a message from my friend, Cameron. The message said, "It sucks you couldn't go over to Claire's house as you would have had a great time." "What do you mean, Cameron?" I replied.
Your girlfriend, she was great.
He replied. I felt my heart skip a beat and was really sad. My friend Cameron, who knew I was with Claire, had met up with her, so to speak. I texted Claire right away.
Claire, we're done.
What I didn't expect was for her to beg me to stay, but I said no, that's it. Later that night, she sent me a picture on Snapchat, showing her arm all freshly cut up, and the caption said, "All thanks to Jacob." I went to bed without saying anything in reply. I just let her take her time to recover. The next morning, I woke up with over 100 text messages, all covered in knife emojis. Now I was really scared, to be honest. It was Monday, so I had to go to school. Her locker was right behind mine, so I couldn't see if she was going to do something. I was afraid she might attack me at any moment. The day went by so slowly, and the whole time I was scared. I got so worried that I asked the principal if they could check her locker because I didn't feel safe at school that day. The principal wanted to know why, so I showed her the text messages. After seeing them, she agreed. When she came back, she told me what they found, and I couldn't believe it. They found a needle with ink, razor blades, and a 3-inch knife with Jacob carved into it. The principal called the police, and she got kicked out of our school. I didn't hear anything about her until last week. I was at my cousin Danny's wedding, and she told me that after what happened, Claire went to 3 different schools, and at each one, she caused more problems. So I'm happy that I dodged a dangerous situation. Before I start telling my story, let me share some details about myself. I'm 14 years old and have 2 older sisters who have already finished college. They are 39 and 26 years old. I also have 2 little twin brothers who are 5 years old. My mom is a doctor and my dad owns a diner. Anyway, this happened when I was 11, in my 5th grade year during graduation time in late May and early June. My best friend, let's call her Katie, was always there for me. But sadly, she moved away a week before graduation, and I felt really sad and lonely without a friend. Katie had been with me since kindergarten, always in the same classes, and it felt like she was always there for me. From the beginning of kindergarten to almost the end of 5th grade, we shared so much. Losing her friendship felt like a punishment. Luckily, another friend, who is now my boyfriend, let's call him Joe, was there to support me and keep me happy. I really didn't know what I would have done without him. In June, I got a message on Kik from a guy named N. I didn't know who N was or how he got my Kik, because I only shared it with close friends. This was before everyone used social media a lot, so having a phone and social media was a big deal for me. But anyway, N messaged me during school saying,
"Hey, how are you? I hope I'm not wasting your time."
I was unsure about what to do because I didn't know him and was worried he might be weird or something. So I didn't reply right away. I waited until I felt safe in my room later that day to reply to the message. I replied to the guy saying, "Hey,
Not to be rude, but I don't know you and you messaged me during class. But how did you get my account?
Soon after sending that, I got a quick response saying,
Oops, my bad. I thought you were the girl on Roblox. If you want, I can remove you right away."
I was surprised at how fast he replied. I wondered if he had just gotten home or was homeschooled to respond so quickly. It felt like he was waiting for my reply, even though it took me about 3 hours to respond. So I said no problem, I could use some new friends. A few minutes later, he replied saying,
"That's great. So what's your name?"
I told him my name, and he told me his name. Then I asked N if he had a picture of himself, and he sent me about 15 of them.
"You're pretty cute."
I said. Then, to be fair, I sent some pictures of mine. Around 9:37 p.m. that night, he asked if he could call me. I felt nervous and scared because you can't always trust people, even if they seem nice. So I had to lie and tell him I had a bedtime and needed to go to bed. He texted me asking,
"Why not? It's Friday. You can stay up a little longer, so what's the rush?"
I then told him that I needed to be up early tomorrow to go to the hospital for a health checkup in the morning. He said,
"Okay then. Good night, baby doll."
I was a bit confused, but also a little happy. Guys don't usually talk to me in a romantic way. They're mostly just friends. Hearing this from him made me feel happy, like I meant something special to him. After ending the conversation with him, I texted my friend Joe, but when I told Joe what happened, he said he didn't like N and that I should block him. I told Joe that it was the first time a guy said something like that to me, and he should be happy for me. Joe is a year older and my best friend since I was 7. He explained that guys shouldn't call girls names like that because they might be trying to trick them into liking them, only to hurt them later. I told Joe that he was just being jealous, and then I said I was going to bed. Okay, fine. Sorry for coming on strong, but if you decide to date this guy, don't come crying to me when he breaks your heart. I sent a goodnight text to Joe and started texting my best friend Katie. She told me I should date him, but shared some rules before dating. She also said that if we ever break up, she wants first dibs. I laughed and said no way, and we joked about it for a while. The next morning, around 10, I got a new message from N that said, "Hi, baby doll. How did you sleep?" Taking advice from the talk I had with my friend Joe the night before gave me the courage to say, please don't call me that unless we're actually dating. It seemed like N had a plan because as soon as he saw my message, he replied with,
"Oh, so you want to date me?"
I was speechless at that point. Even though he seemed nice in his pictures, I had never talked to him on the phone yet, and he wanted to date me.
"No, not now. I'm only 11, so it would be weird."
I texted. I guess I made N angry because he said,
"Oh, okay, fine then. We're going to talk tonight about this, and you better answer my text, okay?"
What? I thought to myself. Is he yelling at me through text? I didn't know what to say, and that was the first red flag that something might be wrong. First, he wanted to call me, then he asked me to date him. And now he's yelling at me because I said no. I should have ended it right then and there, and never responded to him again. But no. I agreed to his text and said,
"Okay."
I saw all these warning signs in my head, but I ignored every one of them. After that day, a couple of months passed and we were FaceTiming each other. Another friend of mine, let's call him Henry, came into view on my end and gave me a hug, saying I was his best friend. But then, only 2 seconds later, N hung up on FaceTime and sent a text saying he could cheat as well. It took me 2 hours to explain to N that Henry was just my friend. Obviously, he was a jealous kind of guy and couldn't trust me around other guys. Another warning sign that I ignored. Besides that incident that day, everything else seemed fine. It was like he was in different moods whenever I did anything he didn't like. So after that, I made sure any contact with my male friends stayed hidden from him. You can probably tell by now that N was quite demanding. He was somewhat controlling over me. I would often get messages from followers on Instagram. It was an influx of messages from other girls, claiming to be from his state or school. Apparently, they were looking out for me, telling me I needed to break up with N and find someone else fast before something happened. I thought it was just a prank. Maybe it was his friends just messing with me. Months passed, and me and N were now about 2 years into our relationship. Around that time, I started thinking our relationship wasn't the best, and maybe we should break up. So in the summer of 2016, he came to my area. It was going to be our first time meeting in person instead of just on a screen. I told him I wanted to meet at a public place, and we agreed to meet up at the local park. A few blocks away, there was a restaurant where we could grab some lunch. After that, his mom could pick us up, drop me off at home, and they could go back to their hotel. We met up, and I could see that he was cute in person, just like he was on the screen. But I had my best friends, Katie, Henry, and Joe, all watching from a distance. I was so happy that Kay could make it, because she was visiting her dad that week. So I thanked her for being there for me. N and I ended up talking for about 2 hours, and he even gave me his hoodie. After that, we walked to the restaurant and asked for a table. I sent a message to my best friend saying, "The dragon is in the nest." It was our code, so to speak, telling them to come join us. As usual, I hugged all 3 of them, but I saw that N was getting angry. He pulled me by my arm and told me quietly,
"I could break up with you right now if I wanted to, but let's act like I just told you something so that your friends don't think I'm some psycho. This is the last time you'll see your friends tonight. Now laugh."
He was being rough with me, both verbally and physically. I can't explain how I was feeling at that point, so I did as I was told. I laughed, but it was so awkward. It was a giveaway to my friend Katie. She noticed how weird it was and asked if I needed to go to the bathroom with her. I nodded and quickly walked to the bathroom. Once there, I told Katie everything that had been happening, and she was shocked. She said we needed to be out of his sight right now, and that N needs to be out of my life. So me and Katie found the back door and texted the boys Henry and Joe that we were waiting outside. I sent a long message to N. Once it was sent, I told Katie that we need to get to my house, away from the restaurant and away from N. When we got back to my house, I was starting to calm down, but then there was banging at the door not too long after. Someone was outside yelling, calling me bad words and saying things like,
"I'm going to enjoy taking your life and drinking your blood. You don't cross me at all, girl. You're going to regret this, and I'm going to make sure of that."
We called the police. Katie was on the line with the dispatcher, who then said that the cops were on their way. We later found out that while N was at the restaurant, after getting my message that it was over and I was going home without him, he pulled a knife on Henry and Joe. My guy friends who were still at the restaurant were keeping an eye on him, so that made it all clear. N was not okay. How could I have missed that about him? He had a weapon, threatened to hurt me, and he meant it. What was wrong with this guy? In short, the parents of these boys were informed, and they told me that the reason N wanted to keep me was that when he was a child, he was very close to a girl who had suddenly disappeared. They believed that this didn't sit right with their son, but after everything that happened, something tells me that he might have caused that disappearance, and I'm glad that I didn't become the next disappearance. I was by myself in my college apartment waiting for Saturday night to finish. Time was going by so slow and I couldn't sleep, so I tried eating some snacks, but it didn't help. On Saturdays, I usually take a shower at midnight, and that night was no different. While I was in the shower, I noticed words on my bathroom window. They said,
"I'm watching you and I always will,"
with a heart and a handprint. I didn't pay much attention to it and just went to bed, getting ready for my shift the next day. The following Saturday, when I took a shower again, I covered the window this time. After I finished and got dressed to leave, I heard knocking on the window. The noise kept getting louder every second, and there was another message. It said,
"Honey, I love you, and I know you feel the same. Let's make it happen, and with you next to me, I know we'll be happy."
It had 2 hearts and 2 smiley faces. Now I got scared and ran. I grabbed my phone to take a picture and show it to the police, to make sure it was real. When I got home after showing the pictures, those messages were gone. I was tired but too scared to sleep. Though eventually, I did fall asleep. I finished all my college classes and was getting ready for work the next day. But before my midnight shower, I made sure to have my phone with me. After my shower, I got dressed and was about to leave when I heard knocking. A creepy voice whispered,
"Annie, are you planning to leave me alone like that? Come on, Annie."
I got scared and hid in the kitchen, locked the door and grabbed a knife for safety. I called the police, told them everything, and said where I was hiding. I couldn't open the door. They promised to send police right away. Then I realized I didn't look closely at the picture I took or read what was on the window. When I finally opened it, I was really shocked.
"My love, I'll treat you like a princess. Submit your body, heart, and soul to me."
The police arrived within minutes and kicked down the doors. 2 officers escorted me outside my apartment, staying with me for safety. I was so scared that I was shivering when one of the police tried to comfort me. After a few minutes, they came out of my apartment and found a man hiding inside. It turned out to be my next-door neighbor who had been stalking me. He thought we were going to be together, so I had to take him to court and get a restraining order. After everything that happened, I had to move out of that apartment and get away from there. I haven't seen the guy since, and I really hope I never do again. Alright, there is this guy in high school named Clyde. Pretty much everyone kept their distance from him, except for his two friends, who were equally gross. In my junior year, I had the misfortune of being assigned to a seat right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the teacher to move my seat at the end of the class period on the first day. Before I could even get a chance, Clyde was already starting to annoy me. He kept asking me all these questions about where I got my bag, my shoes, my top, and if my hair color was natural or dyed. All these questions coming from a person whose ass I could smell from 3 feet away. I made it through the first class period and I stayed after to talk to the teacher, but she totally stonewalled me. She was one of those teachers who never really made expectations for anyone or anything. I had been warned about her by some seniors before. I thought she would let it slide instead of making a girl sit next to the weirdest known creep in the school for the whole year. But no. It only took a couple of days for Clyde to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I was still walking to and home from school. Clyde found out about this and he took the opportunity to follow me home one day. Or as he put it, escort me home. To make sure I was safe, as if I hadn't been able to take care of myself for the last 2 years. My house was a 15-minute walk from the school. It was usually a perfect amount of time and went through a good area. Time to relax between responsibilities and clear my head. Clyde took this and made it feel like eternal hell. We were out in the open, so everybody in the school was able to see us. Most people knew about what was going on, but some people actually thought I wanted to hang out with him. When I knew I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as I could, which wasn't very nice, but even that had been too much. It was too late to be mean because I tried that too, and it didn't work. He found a way to gush about everything I said and did. He kept comparing us and arguing that we were very similar somehow. He was obsessed with the idea that we could get together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but my name isn't even close to Bonnie. The worst part of him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's not a surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I drew a hard line there and almost spit in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have really enjoyed that. I tried talking to my counselor about this to see if I could change classes, but he was also unhelpful. He would say things like, "Clyde hasn't done anything wrong," which was pretty much useless for me. At the beginning of September, we had a 3-day weekend for Labor Day. I rebelled in having an extra day away from Clyde, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for the fact that I hadn't been able to reconnect with any of my friends from school. This meant that I had no plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that all I wanted to do was lay in bed. I only had one thing going on, which was a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I had terrible sleep. I kept getting rushes of anxiety for seemingly no reason, and every time I started to fall asleep, I fell straight into a nightmare about Clyde. At one point, I woke up and I even thought I saw his face in the window. I had a mini heart attack, but when I blinked, he was gone. Just to be sure, I got up and I looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and I even put down the blackout curtains I never use. I couldn't sleep at all after that. I really couldn't decide if what I saw was real or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I'm just waking up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider descending toward me on a thread, but when I blink, it goes away before my body even wakes up enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to make extra sure that we locked up the house before we left for the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Clyde and how he had been following me around. At least they had a concern for me, thankfully. My dad assured me that he would lock the house, and my mother went the extra mile to remind me that she was a good shot with a taser. Then she gave me the little bottle of pepper spray from her keychain. It made me feel a little bit better, but I was still out of it the whole day. My relatives kept asking me if I was okay, and all I could say was yes. He didn't get home until about 8 o'clock that night. I had a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure that the back door was still locked. Afterward, I went straight to my room, and I watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I passed out. Sometime later I woke up, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was gripped with sleep paralysis. The closest thing I have had to a sleep paralysis demon is the dangling spider I had mentioned earlier, but there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to take a breath, but it was like I had forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead, and I looked around my room, but I got creeped out because it was darker than usual due to the curtains. Of course, I could clearly see Clyde's face peeking over the edge of my bed. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, but I still couldn't move. I kept staring at his face, waiting for it to go away, praying for it to be a hallucination. But when I blinked, he didn't go away. He moved. Clyde slowly stood up and hovered over me. "Let's have a sleepover," he whispered, as he approached my mouth with a strip of duct tape. At the last second, I broke free from the grip of sleep paralysis and screamed as I grabbed the pillow next to me and stuffed it into his face. He blindly stuck the piece of tape over my mouth, but while he couldn't see what was going on, I quickly reached underneath the pillow I was sleeping on and grabbed the pepper spray my mother gave me and undid the safety like she explained. Then I pointed it right at his face at the exact moment he ripped the pillow away. I fired the spray and it nailed him as well as it possibly could, but some of it backfired and got on me. We were both incapacitated, but luckily, it only took another 15 seconds for my parents to come running into my room, at which point they conducted a citizen's arrest until the police arrived. The cops did a sweep of the house and found damage to the outside of the lock on the back door, which indicated Clyde had picked the lock. It truly doesn't surprise me at all that lock-picking is something he is good at. Clyde went to a juvenile detention center for a couple of weeks. Then, through an annoying bureaucratic process, I managed to get him expelled from school. I was once in a relationship with the craziest girl I've ever met. I was pretty desperate for love when I thought I fell for her. She might have been the hottest girl I'll ever be with, but she was so not worth it. I realized that she was extremely unhealthy for me. She spent all my money and ran off all my friends, and once she had me to myself, she used up all my free time and drained my life force. That's not even going into the slightest detail about all the little things that make her craziness her own kind of special crazy. I finally couldn't do it anymore, and I broke it off as humanly as I possibly could. I did it in person, in a private setting, in my car right in front of her apartment. She cried, screamed, and slapped me in my face. She even threw some things around and made a huge mess in my car. But no matter what she said, I told her there was no chance I would take her back. She stormed off, and the last thing she said to me before she slammed the car door was that I would regret ever doing her wrong. In reality, I actually regret ever fooling myself into thinking it was a good idea to get into bed with her in the first place. Once I drove off, I felt a wave of relief. It felt like I had been freed from the spell of an evil witch. I spent the rest of the day doing all the things I never got to do when she was around. Then I hit up my friends and went to the bar with them for the first time in a month. I told them about how it went down, and they warned me about something. Just like they warned me about the dangers of crazy girls when I first got with her. "This is not over," they said. "You might be done with her, but she's not done with you." They could not have been more correct. That very night, when my buddies and I left the bar, I went to my car and noticed something in the trough between the hood and the windshield. I took a closer look and I pulled out a crooked and rusted 6-inch steel nail. I keep my car very clean, so I was pretty sure it hadn't been there in the morning. I don't know anything about witchcraft or magic, and I don't believe any of it. But my ex-girlfriend was a proudly self-proclaimed witch, so I had a suspicion it had something to do with her. I asked one of my friends to ask his girlfriend about it, and she confirmed what I thought, explaining that my ex probably used it in some kind of spell to hex me, and then left it with me to make sure it did the harm it was supposed to. What a bunch of BS, I thought, but I was still concerned about what else the woman might do. After I found out it was definitely from my ex, I chucked it into the trash. Unfortunately, this was only just the beginning. Over the course of the next week, I went through an ordeal, much of which is probably familiar to many. One morning, I woke up and saw a bunch of key marks on my car. Apparently, they were runes. The next day, 3 of the tires were slashed. 24 hours after that, there was a bunch of broken glass and rusty nails on my doorstep, surrounded by a dark stain on the concrete. My friend's girlfriend said it was probably a vial of war water. What? I don't even know what that means, and quite frankly, I didn't really care. At a certain point, I even started to see her out of the corner of my eye. Just glimpses, though. When I actually turned to look at her, she would be gone, around the corner or behind something, and too far away for me to do anything about it. I was just as annoyed as I was scared. I didn't know what she was capable of, but her intentions were clearly not good. 6 days after we broke up, there was a psychotic note on my door impaled with, you guessed it, a long, rusty nail. It basically said that if I don't want to suffer the greatest agonies imaginable in this life and even greater suffering in the afterlife, I have to immediately go to her apartment and grovel at her feet. Beg, plead, ask for forgiveness, and swear that I'll become completely subservient to her. Yeah, real crazy stuff. To hell with that. I didn't do anything, obviously. I had work the next day. I was done letting my life revolve around that immature idiot. I just got my car back from the shop after getting new tires, and since she already targeted my car before, I figured she would do something else to it. I was right, but that wasn't all. When I walked back to my car at the end of my shift, my heart sank. I could see it from 100 feet away, another damn crooked rusty 6-inch nail. But this time, she drove it through my windshield, causing the whole thing to crack into a million pieces. Thankfully, the laminated layer held it all together, but it was totally impossible to see through it. I pulled out my phone and sat down in my car to call another tow truck. But the second I closed the door, I smelled it. My ex's perfume. It was strong too. A chill ran down my spine at that exact moment. I instinctively knew she was right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw her crawling out from the floorboard of the back seat. She had the look of pure evil on her face. While smiling, she wrapped her arms around my seat in a weird kind of hug from behind. Then I realized she was holding one of those rusty 6-inch nails in her hands. The point was directed at my heart, and from the shine at the tip, it had clearly been sharpened. She was ready to plunge it into my heart. I laughed. "You're not strong enough to stab that through my sternum," I said.
Shut up.
She screamed.
I'm strong enough to stab it through your windshield, wasn't I? What if I jam it through one of your ribs? Or why don't I just shove it down your throat? Huh? How about that? You smart ass.
She brought the point of the nail to my jugular, though in the moment I did not care in the slightest. I was suddenly overcome with anger. My patience was gone. All I saw was red. I grabbed my keys and turned on my car.
What are you doing?
Shouted my ex.
Don't go anywhere, or I'll stick you with this.
She stuck the nail into my flesh and drew blood, but I barely felt it. I switched into first gear and I floored it. The nail cut the side of my neck as my ex flew backwards into the seat. She started screaming bloody murder and trying to regain her footing so she could come get at me, but I was already in second gear, racing through the lanes of the parking lot, struggling to see where I was going through the broken windshield. Once she was climbing over the center console, I slammed on the brakes. Suddenly, I noticed the crazy amount of pain that was in my neck, but she finally got what she deserved and flew straight into the windshield. The lamination still didn't give out and caught her like a net, keeping her inside. I pulled the parking brake, stepped out, then dragged the squealing maniac out of my car and threw her onto the asphalt. I sat back down in my car and locked the doors, then called the police. While they were on their way, my ex banged on the door and tried to force her way into my car.
Look what you did to me.
She wailed, pointing at her face. There was a deep gash on the right side of her face, all the way from above her right eyebrow to the corner of her lip. When the police came, they arrested me and took her to the hospital. She pressed charges on me and we almost went to court. But at the last second, the case was dismissed thanks to my lawyers who brought to the attention of the judge all the stalking she had been doing. In the end, my actions were ruled as self-defense. Things still aren't over for me, unfortunately. She's found a new way of ruining my life. I'm being sued in civil court now, but I think in the end, my counter lawsuit will win out. It just goes to show that you should avoid making impulsive decisions. Don't date crazy people, and I guess even if you have a sharp object being held against your throat, you should try to defend yourself as gently as possible. When I was in college and lived in the dorms, I did most of my studying either in the library or the Starbucks on campus. The library was free to get into and quieter, but the Starbucks was closer to most of my classes and had coffee. Plus, I could hang out with my friends at the same time. It was a popular place for that reason and my preferred study spot as well. I had a routine of going there after class and immediately getting everything done so I could have my evenings free. I never paid attention to what was going on around me or who was sitting in the coffee shop. My ability to focus was pretty strong, especially with the help of caffeine and my ADHD medication. My friends weren't quite the same, however. They were much chattier and liked to people watch during their breaks. At the start of the second semester, a new person showed up at the coffee shop. If nobody had told me about him, I would have assumed he had been around all year like anybody else. But my friends knew they had never seen this guy. He seemed harmless at first, just like anybody else. And he was more of a new potential piece of gossip than any sort of threat. When he was pointed out to me, all I saw was another guy with a latte working on his laptop and taking notes while listening to music. My friends asked me what I thought about him, like if he was cute, or if I knew who he was. He was kind of pale and a little greasy and had a weak chin, but overall, he was unassuming. "He's a stranger," I said, "and kind of an ugly one." Perhaps I said it too loud because the noise and the laughter of my friends made him glance over at us for just a second. I looked away and got back to work. The next day, he was there at the coffee shop again, doing the exact thing he was doing the day before, writing things down in his notebook, staring at his laptop, and occasionally looking around. I didn't think anything of it. Even when I saw him every day, I went there the entire next week. The only thing that struck me as strange was the fact that I was taking notice of it. I'm sure I saw the same 50 faces in there every single time, but I never even registered their existence. What was it about this guy that made me subconsciously pay attention to him? I had no idea. But then again, I had bigger things to deal with. I had notes to take, lectures to listen to, and textbooks to read. I had one class week that was right next to the library. So naturally afterward I would do my studying there, instead of going across campus to go to Starbucks. It was nice to get a break. Peace and quiet was always nice. Nobody talks in the library. Everybody was in their own little world. Not even people watching was a thing. Everyone had their faces down and noses to the grindstone. Everyone except for that one guy. About 10 minutes into my study session, I noticed him sit down about 10 tables away. I rolled my eyes and tried to ignore him, but he kept looking at me. Not glancing, but staring for a few seconds, and then looking down once I saw. At this point, it seemed like he may have been developing a crush on me. But I was determined to not let any boys distract me from my goals. After a few more days, he faded into the background. The novelty wore off, and I no longer cared if he was around me or not. Unfortunately, as much as I tried to ignore him, the more he appeared everywhere I went. Even on my way back to my dorm after the 6 o'clock class that had ended at 8 p.m. I was just trying to get home after a long day of class. I walked out the door of the building and nobody was behind me except for the other students in the class that just ended, which I knew did not contain any pale, greasy men with weak chins. And yet, once I made it down the steps and onto the sidewalk, there he was, just standing there. That's when my stomach dropped. I kept on going as I wanted to avoid interaction. Eventually, I found myself alone with him following me. I made it inside my dorm hall and headed to my door, which was on the first floor. I was terrified that this creep would scan his ID and follow me inside. But when I got to my dorm, I glanced back at him. He was just standing in front of the glass and staring at me. I quickly got inside my dorm and locked the door behind me. Unfortunately, my roommate wasn't there to calm my nerves. Claustrophobia started to set in for me, so I turned on some music and tried to study before bed. But I couldn't focus. It took me 3 hours to finish what should have only taken me 1. Finally, at 11 o'clock, I was finally finished. I fell asleep absolutely exhausted. I didn't even stir when my roommate came home. I had some strange nightmares, however, but I don't remember them much. All I know is I woke up in a cold sweat, but when I got up out of bed, I realized something so disturbing that it changed the way I live many aspects of my life. There was a piece of paper stuck to my stomach by my sweat, and when I stood up, it fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. There were only 6 words written on it. "You are a victim, an ugly one." My heart sank to the floor. My roommate asked me what was wrong, and I begged her to tell me if she locked the door when she came home from the party she went to last night. But she just shrugged. When we checked, we found that she had left it unlocked when she stumbled in. That could potentially mean that the door was wide open for that weirdo to sneak into our room, and for what? Just to scare me? Gradually, things started to make sense, an awful, sick, demented sense that I never wanted to understand. I hadn't realized that I was being stalked for the last month. That weak-chinned creep didn't even go to the school. That's why he showed up in the middle of the year and nobody knew who he was, and why he couldn't get into the dorm without following somebody in. All those notes he took were probably about my routine and may also be about the routines of other girls too, but I couldn't understand why. Was it because I said he was ugly? Could that be what sent him into a month-long obsession? I reported him right away, but the school's response wasn't that helpful. They said if I ever had a problem with it again, I should report it to the police. However, I guess that sick freak got bored of me in my college, because he was never seen again. My guess is, he was using us as targets to practice on. In all fairness, this experience has taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and more wary of danger. I usually take things slow when it comes to online dating. I chat with the person until I feel comfortable, and then we meet in a public place. I always let my friends know where I am, just in case. I've had fun or not so great dates, but never any real problems. I've actually made some really good friends this way. Sometimes I just don't hear from the person again, and that's okay. No big deal. I recently met a guy on Plenty of Fish. We chatted a lot on the app and talked on the phone for hours. He seemed like a nice guy, so we decided to meet. He lives about 45 minutes away in a town, so it's a bit unfamiliar for me. We talked about me staying at his place, so we decided to get some drinks. I thought it might be better to get a room for myself instead of staying at his place right away. I don't know why, but I stopped thinking logically at some point because we left my car near a park. I had no clue how to get back to it from his place since he took so many turns during the drive. Then, he suggested I crawl into the back of his van because it's a small town and he didn't want anyone to see me. I should have turned around and walked back to my car right then. He even took my phone and put it in a box to hide its location. But I thought we were just having a fun conversation, maybe playing a silly game based on how he talked before. When I visited his home, we watched movies, talked, and everything seemed normal. Then we had dinner. But at some point, he started acting strange. He asked a lot of questions in a kind of scary way, making me feel a bit uncomfortable. So I suggested he could drive me back to my car so I could go home, but he refused. He thought I was joking and told me to call a cab if I wanted to leave. At this point, I have my phone back and messaged a friend, just in case something went wrong. I knew how to get to my car from a certain point if she could pick me up. Okay, well, I decided to just sleep and get the night over with. And that's what eventually happened, and I made it home safely. But surprisingly, we kept talking afterward. Phone calls, texts, and we both agreed the first meeting was awkward. He apologized, and we decided to hang out again. It turned out much better. I felt at ease, and we shared lots of laughs, so it was actually good. Also, this time I willingly stayed the night, feeling comfortable instead of trapped. He offered to get my pillow from my bag, and when he went to the other room, My makeup bag fell out. Then I fell asleep while we were talking. The next morning, he drove me to my car, but we didn't talk much during that time. Then I was busy being a bridesmaid and doing last-minute things. In the evening, he texted me again. So, when I was free around 2 a.m., which wasn't unusual for us, I texted him to see if he was awake and still wanted to talk. This is when he gets upset with me, asking about some script I supposedly have for him and what I really want. I was confused. What script is he talking about? I remind him that we agreed to start as friends and get to know each other. Then he calls me a stupid out-of-towner for carrying a makeup bag, saying it's some kind of act or smokescreen. He thinks it's sloppy, and my plan to call him later is a red flag for him. Even though he knew I had things to do, I was just thinking, It was easy for me to leave it all behind. Then a week later, I got a voicemail demanding a call right away. I was at work, so I simply ignored it. Later, when I tried to listen to it again after an hour, the message was gone. I knew I saved it. I even checked the erased messages, but it wasn't there. I assume it was him because the same thing happened with the message he left the following night. He said really bad things, just awful stuff. He said things like, "You come in here with your makeup bag full of gels and stuff, trying to collect evidence at my place to put people in trouble and hurt them. Go away and don't lie about sleeping in the bed next time or doing some detective work. I should slap you in the mouth." This has never happened to me before, and I'm not sure how to respond. I just hope it doesn't get worse. I'm not sure if any of you remember or not, but back in 2016, there was this creepy clown trend, where people dressed up as clowns and hung out in places after dark or scared people. My story happened on my college campus during that fall. Before going to school, I lived with my grandparents and were really close. Also, I'm very shy, and didn't have any friends or people I regularly hung out with at school. Wanting to meet new people, I signed up for a salsa dancing club that met on Friday nights. I told my grandma over the phone, and she was happy I was putting myself out there. She asked if I was going with anyone. I said no. I'll just go alone, no big deal.
Are you sure?
She asked.
Don't any of your roommates want to go?
Talking to my roommates scared me. I was okay with planned events, but personal talks made me feel awkward. No, they're not here.
I don't want you walking around campus by yourself at night.
I thought my grandma was just being extra careful. Grandma, it's fine. The streets have good lights, and it's only a 10-minute walk. It's safe.
Well, if you're not going with anyone, call me. I'll talk to you on the phone while you walk back.
I said fine. That night was super fun. I was learning the basic dance steps and dancing to lively Latin songs. Then around 10:30, I felt like going back to my dorm, so I quietly left the building and walked towards my dorm. Even though there were streetlights along the way, but it seemed darker than usual. Plus, the whole campus was empty. Usually there were lots of people my age around, but that night there was no one. I called my grandma and chatted with her while I walked. I took off my heels and carried them in my hand. So now, the path I was on passed by a stretch of sidewalk that went in a different direction under a streetlight about 10 miles away. I saw a person standing with their back to me. They heard me talking on the phone and slowly turned towards me. This person was tall and big with wild red hair, and it looks like they were wearing light blue pajamas. But here's the weird part. Their face was hidden behind a clown mask. The mask was super white with really dark eyes and a mean-looking grin. It felt like time suddenly went very slow. The clown didn't come closer. He just stood there, staring at me. I knew I had to decide quickly. I thought about my choices. A, scream and run away like a scared kid. Or B, go up to him and ask what's up. Or C, act like he didn't scare me. The whole thing I just talked about didn't take more than a second, but it felt like forever.
Are you there?
My grandma asked on the phone. I remembered to breathe and kept the phone close. I decided to go with Plan C and stopped looking at the clown.
What's going on? Is Is everything okay?
My grandma asked. Suddenly she sounded worried. I tried to act confident and casual, walking past the sidewalk where the clown was standing and still talking on the phone. Then his head slowly turned as I walked by, watching me until I was out of sight. I went into the archway of the closest building and tried the door, hoping it was open. Luckily it was. Once I got inside, I leaned against one of the concrete walls and couldn't hold back my tears. I told my grandma everything on the phone. My grandma shouted for my grandpa to call the campus police on his phone so I could stay on the line with her. Then I got up and started walking back and forth in the empty halls, checking every door and window to make sure the clown didn't follow me. Was he just a stupid kid doing a dare? Or was he someone with bad intentions? Some of those clowns in the news had weapons, like axes or baseball bats. I didn't know if that clown had something dangerous. When my grandpa tried to explain to the officer on the phone what happened and that I needed help, he said, "Your granddaughter needs to make the call herself." They wanted me to talk to them, so they could be sure the call wasn't a joke or some kind of prank. The important thing here is that they wouldn't believe my grandparents. I had to end the call with my grandma and then call the campus police myself. Then I told my grandma while crying, "I love you." She replied, "I love you too," while also crying. I called the campus police and explained who I was and what happened. While I was talking, I heard a door open. I got really scared. Was the clown here? Did he get in somehow? I felt a huge relief when several officers walked down the hallway. They walked with me back to my dorm. I called my grandma again to tell her I was safe. We chatted a bit more and then said goodnight. Since then, I've made a few friends at school. Although things are better for me now, I don't go out by myself after dark anymore. This is something that happened to me just a couple months ago. I really like Facebook. I enjoy looking at memes, chatting with new people, and reading long comment sections. However, I'm careful not to share personal details like where I live or work, and I keep my birthday private too. Despite not knowing them personally, I've made some friends on Facebook through good discussions or shared interests. So, when Tyler messaged me after we commented on a friend's post, it wasn't surprising. Our conversation started simple, just talking about the post, asking how we were doing, and sharing common interests. I was happy to make a new friend. He seemed interesting, and we had a lot to talk about. I'm not too pretty or anything like that, but I made sure he knew I was happily in a relationship. Even though I liked being friends, I let him know it wouldn't go beyond that since I'm getting married next year. He seemed a bit sad, but polite, which was good. I said goodnight, went to sleep, and didn't think much about it. We kept talking for a few days, but then he started to be a bit insistent if I didn't reply right away. I explained that I'm really busy and I might not always respond quickly. So I started to keep my distance because he didn't really back off. But I didn't want to totally give up on our friendship because I felt bad that he was so lonely. Then one day, he randomly messaged me, saying he wanted to hug me. I stopped him, reminding him about my relationship and telling him if he didn't stop, our friendship would be over. I'm very loyal and respectful to my fiancé. He got really upset and made threats toward him. I stopped messaging him and chose to ignore his messages. He could still message me, but it wouldn't go to my main inbox. I made a post about it, and a friend of mine commented saying he did the same thing to her. I got really scared and checked for more messages from him because she told me he was a trouble and I should call the police if he made threats. This is where everything got really bad. He messaged me many times saying different things. Then he talked about some random person annoying him on the road, and later he said he was going to hurt that person, blaming me for making him angry by ignoring him. I messaged him, telling him to leave me alone, but he didn't stop and kept asking for my house address. That really scared me as I never told him where I lived or anything close to my house. The only thing I mentioned was that I talked to him later because I was going to Arby's for some food. Somehow he knew I was 7 minutes away from the Arby's near my house, the same time it takes for me to walk there. Then he started figuring out the street where I lived, even knowing about a 4-door black car linked to my address. It was true, but not in my name. My sister registered it as an Uber. That scared me a lot, so I called the non-emergency number. But the police didn't do anything. They said unless he actually came or did something, they couldn't help. Even though he sent me pictures of people whom he hurt, threatened my family, and narrowed down my address, I felt stuck unless he showed up. The only thing I could do was get a protective order, so I did. My fiancé has a cousin who knows a lot about tech, so they somehow managed to find the last few addresses Tyler had. But the police couldn't locate him at any of those places. We had his license plate numbers, his address, full name, birthday, and more. But still, he seemed impossible to trace. He stopped bothering me for a while, but on the day of my court case to extend the protective order to 2 years, he started again. My fiancé decided to file criminal charges for the threats he made. Then one day, Tyler had said, someone could come hurt you in 15 minutes. And his last known address was exactly a 15-minute drive from my house. I was really scared, to say the least. I've been terrified for the past few months. Finally, he was arrested and served. It turns out he has a history of doing these things. Many charges were dropped or dismissed. He did the same thing to a couple of my friends who came to support me in court for the criminal charges. They dropped everything from serious crimes to a smaller charge of disorderly conduct. With 12 months of possible jail time, they couldn't prove it was him and not someone else using the computer. Even though I never saw his face in real life before the court date, 2 people who got messages from him and saw him in person backed me up. I can't sleep well. The smallest noise makes me panic. It's been a terrible nightmare for me and my family, but I think I'm going to be okay. This happened last Halloween night when I decided to go for a walk in the woods at 9 p.m. since I had been sitting around all day. It was something I really enjoyed. Everything looked different in the dark. As I walked past my neighbor's house, they were having a big Halloween party. There were flashing lights in the windows, loud music, and I could also hear drunk people having fun in the yard. But soon enough, I reached the quiet woods, just like I had planned. As I walked through the forest path, I started feeling really nervous and scared. It was dark and I couldn't see well. I had to take my earbuds off to hear better and be more careful. The scared feeling went away a bit when I got out of the woods and onto a street near my home. I turned the corner to my street, put my earbuds back on, and played loud nightcore music. I started thinking I was stupid for getting scared about nothing, but then I saw a person come from behind the house and I got scared. They were really thin. I held my house keys between my fingers like I learned from the internet and tried to see who it was. It was a man, quite tall, bald, and wearing a black suit. He was really pale, and because I couldn't see well, I almost freaked out thinking it was Slender Man coming for me. But a moment later I saw that he did have a face and he had painted it to look like a skull. The man was really drunk and walking in a wobbly way across the empty street toward me. For a moment, I hoped he was too drunk to see me, but that hope went away as he came right to me. I was very scared and couldn't move. My house was only 2 houses away, but I had to get past this weird man, and I didn't know if I could run faster with my asthma. In a state of panic, I thought about ways to get away and be safe from him. Could I turn back and maybe take a longer way around to the other end of my street? Or should I go to my grandma's house? But I don't know if she's awake or even at home. While I was trying to decide, the man put his hand tightly on my shoulder, interrupting my thoughts. He started talking, but I couldn't hear him well because my music was still playing in my ears. All I could hear was him asking why a girl my age was out alone so late at night. I could only stand there and stare. Then the man stopped, lifted his arm, and pointed a finger to the woods behind the houses. At that moment, I thought if I didn't act soon, I might end up in trouble in the woods. I shook him off and I ran as fast as I could pass him towards my house, while even crossing some of the property of the nearby house. At my front door, I was putting my key into the old lock with my shaky hands. I was scared that the man might come and grab me from behind, dragging me into the dark forest on the other side of my yard at any second. Finally, I got inside and made sure the door was locked before I could breathe again. I took off my shoes and went into the basement with tears rolling down my face as I was crying. I told my older brother what happened, and we called our parents who weren't home at that time. They said they would check it out, but we didn't call the police because it was a small town and nothing really bad happened. The next day, my dad told me the drunk man was just a taxi driver in our town. We never talked about it again. I've shared this story with my friends a few times, and it bothers me that I didn't even get an apology from that guy. I truly dislike the whole town and the fact that nobody does anything when things like this happen. Last year, me and my few close friends decided to check out the inside of an old house down the road. The house was at the end of a street and had a big messy yard with old cars that looked like they were very old and broken. The trees around the house were really big, and part of the roof above the bathroom and the bathtub had caved in. It felt kind of creepy on the inside, with dark wood doors and windows that reminded us of a horror movie. Anyway, we found a hole in the fence and went into the yard to explore the place. We walked over fallen branches and old plant stuff until we reached the front door. It was locked. So a friend of mine climbed in through a window, came around, and unlocked the door for us. And that's when the fun started. From the moment we stepped inside the house, it was like we went back 35 years in time. There were old-style couches and furniture covered in dust and mold. There were no electronics whatsoever. No TVs or sound systems were there, but everything else from the owner's life was still there. It was almost like they just decided to leave one day and never came back. Then we headed to the bedroom. The bed still had old, smelly sheets on it. One drawer in the chest of drawers was open, and inside were some old clothes. When I lifted them, I found 3 harmonicas hidden underneath. They were in fancy and interesting cases, seeming quite valuable. Upon leaving the bedroom, we noticed some pictures on the wall. They were just stuck there without frames, and the corners were turning up because they were so old. One picture showed the house in its good times. The sun was shining, the lawn was neat, the trees were trimmed, and on the roof's edge, there was a man sitting and playing the harmonica. It was the same one I found. This picture must have been from the house's best days, when the man with the harmonica had built and taken care of it. So my friends and I decided to call him the Harmonica Man. And there I was, holding that heavy harmonica. It felt kind of sad to see this man's life in front of me, and holding what was probably his most loved thing. 2 of us went to the kitchen, and the other 2 went outside to check an old rounded caravan parked at the back. The kitchen looked like someone just left. There was no fridge or stove. There were cups, however, and plates in the cupboards. Old spice jars and a half-empty bottle of alcohol in one of them. I can't remember if it was wine, because back then I was young and not interested in drinking, thankfully. My friend reached for the whiskey, but the shelf it was on gave way. The bottles, plates, and everything else in the cupboard crashed down, making a loud noise. At the same time, a siren started blaring, like the one in the TV show series Lost. We rushed out, found the opening in the fence, and slipped through. Our 2 friends who had checked the caravan came running through the fence in a hurry. One of them had a bunch of magazines, and the other shouted, "Drop them!" So, he dropped the magazines, and we all ran home as fast as we could. It turns out the magazines were old ladies' magazines from the 70s that someone had kept in the caravan on the old guy's land. It was a weird situation. Later, when we walked by where everything happened, the magazines were gone and the grass was cut. I learned that an old man next door owned the house. It makes me wonder why he left his things there and let it become so run down. He got the house from someone, maybe family, but he just left it there to get all messed up. When we came back the next day on our school trip, we saw that he had cut the grass. And not just that, like I said before. He picked up all the magazines my friend dropped in the front yard. It was strange knowing that someone sort of looks after the house or owns it, but it's still in bad condition.